Alright, what is up, boxing fans? It's Krod here. I'm going to make my post-fight reaction thoughts on Errol Spence Jr. versus Danny Garcia. I guess like main event card review. I'm not gonna just talk about what the main events or let the fights leading up to the main event. It had Miguel Flores versus that Ortiz guy, which Miguel Flores, he unfortunately got knocked out. On top of that, you had who else? You had Josecito Lopez versus Francisco Santana, and then you had Sebastian Fundora versus that Ghanese fighter, which Fundora, he beat the shit out of him in 2 rounds. And then you had Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia. But I'm just going to talk about Danny Garcia versus Errol Spence Jr. This is a very awesome fight. I enjoyed it. The only issue with this is just that this fight really had a lot of questions for Errol Spence. And definitely a lot of criticism towards Danny Garcia. I think either way, it was very well determined, but the output of where this fight was going to go was going to be the main deciding factor of who is going to do more damage in basically in the later portions of the rounds. But either way, Errol Spence dominated Danny Garcia. This is more like a boxing clinic rather than to be a actual fight. I mean, Danny gave Errol a very tough fight, and Errol, he came in prepared. He came in like any other fighter to come in with a lot of pressure and making sure he was on top of his P's and Q's to avoid any of the bigger shots from Danny Garcia. The only issue that I had with Errol Spence was that he wasn't really using his jab as consistently as he always should, but he definitely gave Danny Garcia a fight for his life, where it definitely came to a very strong tug of war when it came to body shots. And Danny's a great fighter. I give Danny like all the credit in the world. But the issue is just that when it comes to Danny's ring, pressure, he doesn't do any of that, and he really needs to start doing that more often if he wants to be credible for his skills. And I just think, like, for Danny, if he wants to make any impact for his credibility as a fighter, I think he needs to definitely switch trainers. His father definitely did what he had to do with making him, fight, a certain fight that he should have fought, which was more aggression. But I think it was just due to Danny's hesitant behavior that made Errol Spence land more cleaner shots to Danny. Which Danny, he was breaking down, but he wasn't really to the point of getting hurt nor getting stopped by Errol. That's a great thing that I like out of Danny. And I actually respect Errol Spence for even crediting Danny Garcia to say that Danny, he's a very tough guy. He is not a very easy outing. If you go to war with Danny, you know what Danny's going to do to you. Danny's just going to pick those shots, and then, he's going to catch you. But the good thing about Errol Spence is that his versatility made the adjustments to beat Danny at his own game. And that's where Errol came out. He was a better man, and Danny, he ain't got nothing to lose over losing to Errol, other than Errol just caught him with really good shots, and Errol was able to pressure Danny to a point where Danny wasn't even, being more aggressive, with his punches, which I, strongly believe that Danny could have done that. And what was sad was just like in the last 10 seconds of round 12, he started letting his hands go. But it's like dude, why didn't you do that in the early rounds? And I think it was because of Errol's reactionary counters that he would do to Danny. Because Danny, he's a reactionary fighter. Errol, he's more of a proactive fighter. So if he can outread Danny quicker than for what Danny can do to Errol, then Errol, he could catch Danny with a flash knockdown punch or any of those punches that Danny doesn't want to get hit with. But I think this is a very highly anticipated bout. Danny Garcia came to fight. He gave Errol some really good hits. Danny's right hand was really wobbling Errol a couple times, but Danny didn't go in and actually give Errol those tough punches because it just seemed like Errol Spence's jab and his footwork of spacing out spacing out the ring with his foot angle movements really got him to a more comfortable position where Danny wasn't able to do anything like that. I mean, Danny, he has great defense. Let's not get it twisted. Errol wasn't hitting him to a certain degree where Danny's like, oh man, I can't be fucking with Errol. No, Danny actually was taking his time, and I think that's a good thing to do. But when it's coming to these big fights, you have to perform at a level of actually dominating your opponents to make them uncomfortable for the time being, for you to dominate your opponents and become a major threat of, how should I say, a major threat of being more aggressive and more dangerous to your opposition. And I think that's where Danny Garcia screwed up. He obviously did what he had to do. He's not a bad fighter. He knows what he has to do in order to make himself more, how should I say, to make himself more credible and making himself a lot more dangerous for the coming fights if he's able to get back into the ring. I think Danny Garcia is definitely a top welterweight for even stepping up against, a guy like Errol. Because, if Danny Garcia really wanted to, he could have just said, fuck Errol Spence. I'll just go the route of fighting maybe Mikey Garcia, maybe Terrence Crawford. But I think it was like a death wish to even do that anyway, because that's not good for your career. And I think it's better to even take the risk anyway to fight Errol Spence, because Errol Spence, he's a very good fighter, but it does not mean that you take risk in big marquee fights where you can possibly get yourself hurt in the fight. But guess what, if you can take that opportunity to make yourself more credible and more notable for the judges, I think that would be very good for you to do that. And that would definitely make you a very notable fighter in the division. Let's not doubt Danny's ability to, be a crappy fighter. He knows how to box. He doesn't have, this poor ability of being a pushover. He has skills, but Errol just got the best of him, which made it a lot easier for him to win the fight. So if Danny was letting his hands go and utilizing his defense as his offense, as aggressive behavior, Danny could have won that fight. I'm not doubting Errol Spence. I think Errol Spence is a great fighter. 27-0 now. Originally 26-0. It was a very fucking good fight. Excuse my French. But let me just make it clear that Errol Spence is a very talented fighter, and where he goes next in his career will make him into a Hall of Famer. He is pound for pound number one in my book. I don't think Terrence Crawford is ever going to be considered pound for pound number one if he could ever try to fight more tougher opposition. I think Errol Spence has already proven himself to be the Paul Pierce of boxing, mixed with a Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan complexity. when I say it in a more abstract term to say that Errol, he has done so much of the heavy lifting. What is out, like, basically, what else is more left for him to do other than just be great at what he's good at, which is just being a boxer and knowing how to use, basically knowing how to utilize his ability and skills to win his fights a lot more strong, like um, a lot more uh, articulate and intelligent. And I think that's what makes Errol Spence such a very dangerous opponent, because he's so good at what he does, and he just knows how to, get his like basically get his mortar going of being such a good fighter, and that's what makes him into such a great character. So I truly believe that Danny Garcia, he is a very big threat to 147 still. People want to try to say, like, oh, he's a gatekeeper. He's going to just get pushed around like he's, basically mincemeat for other up-and-coming welterweights. But that's simply not true. Danny Garcia pretty much got way better from this Errol Spence fight. Believe it or not, Danny Garcia definitely learned a lot from this fight. But, I think once he goes back to the drawing board and make himself a lot more dangerous in bigger fights, I think Danny Garcia is going to be such a crazy fighter in his next fight. My advice personally for Danny Garcia is to be more aggressive, with your punches, and start using more effective jabs when you know that you can take out your opposition faster. And I think he needs to switch trainers. I don't know for any of you Danny Garcia fans that would be like the case, but I do think he does need to do that. He needs to start, using, a trainer that could bring him to the next level, and he will be on his way for being such a good fighter, and nobody's not really going to stop him when he's with the trainer that actually cares about his skills, his talents, and anything that you could think of to the level of being such a huge threat at 147 or whatever weight division he chooses to be in. But I think Danny Garcia, if he wants to be like the best Danny Garcia that we can expect to see in the near coming future, Danny Garcia needs to be with a trainer like Ronnie Shields or Joe Goosen, or let's just say, I don't know, just like anybody out of the particular that could bring him to the next level of high quality, marquee skill of being such a highly bigger threat for his division. And as for Errol Spence, he already has so much accomplishments. What else is really next for Errol Spence? I would say probably fight Manny Pacquiao and then make your way towards Terrence Crawford. I think Errol Spence is just too good at 147. He's already cleaned up most of the division. Obviously, like, everybody wants to see him fight Terrence Crawford, but if Terrence Crawford's not going to negotiate contract discussions properly with Errol Spence, as I pretty much stated that Errol Spence is trying to get the fight made between him and Terrence Crawford, but Terrence Crawford is making the excuse to say that he wants 60-40 split in his favor, knowing that Errol Spence is like the more how should I say, he's like, he's like the more popular fighter that deserves the A-side advantage. Terrence Crawford is just making this harder for himself more than what Errol Spence is trying to accomplish with Terrence Crawford. So I think if Terrence Crawford really wants to help himself, he should really take the 60-40 split for him and Errol Spence to probably be the better fight. obviously, I just personally believe that if it's ever going to go down between him and Terrence Crawford after he, let's just say he defeats Manny Pacquiao, if he is successful, um, Terrence Crawford is probably going to be offered a 70-30 split, because it would not surprise me. But it's just like, what else can Errol Spence do other than try to give Terrence Crawford the best offers ever? But I mean, if Terrence Crawford does get through, does beat a Errol Spence for the unification, on top of getting the undisputed status for 147, then I think Terrence Crawford should just take the 60-40 split, and then everything can be a lot easier for Terrence Crawford, for him to not get screwed over in how much money he wants, but more like just take the opportunity with Errol Spence anyway, and then once you beat him, you're gonna get more money in the rematch. So there's really nothing to argue about. What really makes this a lot harder is that Terrence Crawford fans are making the worst excuses of defending Terrence Crawford, to say that, Terrence Crawford is too dangerous for Errol Spence. Errol Spence doesn't want anything to deal with Crawford, knowing that Errol Spence can fight Terrence Crawford right now if he wants to, but if Crawford's making this a lot difficult for contract negotiations to be made, then what does that say about Terrence Crawford being an actual pound-for-pound number one fighter? And then on top of that, if his resume, doesn't add up with Errol Spence's, where Errol Spence does not want to deal with a contract negotiation where Terrence Crawford is, obviously BSing with Errol to say that he wants a 60-40 split in his favor, then no, he's out of his mind. Terrence Crawford tries to say that Errol Spence needs him more than he needs Errol Spence, but that's simply not true, because Errol Spence does not really need Terrence Crawford. Manny Pacquiao pretty much just came out the other day that he's gonna possibly fight the winner between Spence and Garcia, and now, Errol Spence is now victorious, with his title defense against Danny. So now it seems like Manny Pacquiao is going to fight, Errol Spence next, if he so chooses. And I think, to a business aspect, that's going to make way more money. And Terrence Crawford has pretty much screwed his own career, where if he does stick with Top Rank and try to expect Bob Arum to give him the biggest fights ever, then he's out of his mind, because you're not going to get anything but pure disrespect from Bob Arum to say, no, I'm not going to set up these fights for you. There's just too much money being lost on the line, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like Bob Arum's just going to keep making all these worthless claims to say that, oh, I'm still losing more money with Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford is not really worth my time for Top Rank to grow. And I think I was even hearing that Top Rank isn't going to post any more fights up until, I think, the start of spring. So that's probably, I would say, maybe in June, or maybe, no, probably February. That would make a lot more sense, but I don't even see any of that happening. I mean, if Bob Arum is really losing a lot of money with, his fighters leaving Top Rank, then honestly, Terrence Crawford needs to get the hell out of Top Rank, go to PBC, work with Al Heyman. I'm pretty sure Al Heyman can give you everything that you want as a fighter, and guess what? You can get everything straightened out. But it just so happens to seem that Terrence Crawford, he's being so economically ignorant to think that Bob Arum is going to give you all these big fights. But guess what? You're already losing, your, I guess, his futuristic vision of what he wants done, for these fights to be made. So all these Terrence Crawford fans that expect Terrence Crawford to, be treated just like Errol Spence to get all this money. That's just simply not true. You know, just admit it that Terrence Crawford is not at that level with Errol Spence, and he's not going to be able to sell on the level of Errol Spence yet until he probably fights Errol Spence, or he fights more tougher opponents at 147 that want to fight him. Maybe let's just say a guy like Sean Porter, Keith Thurman, all these fighters that Errol Spence, has fought, or he should have fought, but obviously the contract negotiations never fell through. Yeah, that's what Crawford needs to do. But I think maybe for Crawford's next fight, he needs to get a fight in with Sean Porter. Sean Porter is his mandatory for the WBO belt, even though many would say the WBO is not considered a real belt. But no, it is a real belt, and I think if Terrence Crawford really wants to keep his status at 147 to be strong, fight Sean Porter before fighting Errol Spence, because you're not going to get the fight in with Manny Pacquiao. You are going to be wasting your time with Bob Arum to go, basically negotiate a worthless deal that's never going to be made in your favor. And then guess what? You're going to be a sitting duck like any other top rank trash that gets taken in and then gets thrown out of the bucket of the once called big fish, in the pond, and now you will just be transformed into a small fish being thrown out of the pond by bigger fish. So I think Terrence Crawford is really making a huge mistake by thinking that Bob Arum is going to save him by giving him all these big fights, because that's simply not true. Errol Spence is doing everything right in his favor. Obviously, he went with Al Heyman, and he's doing everything right, and look at where he's at. Not just because he was just given these opportunities, it was the fact that he was already demanding and fighting tougher opposition. And granted, when he had his very first title shot against Kell Brook, yeah, he beat him, but it wasn't a easy victory. He had to go all the way over to the UK, with all the odds stacked against Errol Spence, and Errol Spence actually managed to TKO Kell Brook. And that wasn't just simply because, he was, fighting Kell Brook at a, equal playing field. The judges were probably, against Errol Spence. So, Errol Spence needed to knock Kell Brook out, and he did what he had to do, knowing that Kell Brook, he got injured, from those punches that led to his, orbital eye bone to break. But, yeah, Errol Spence has done most of the heavy lifting, and Terrence Crawford hasn't done anything notable at 147, pounds to make himself a much more bigger threat in the division. I think if Terrence Crawford really wants to help his career, fight Sean Porter before ever thinking to fight Errol Spence, I think that'll help, and that'll make his career grow. So either or, I think this is a damn good main event card that was put together. On top of the undercards was good. My boy Vito Milnecki was fighting on the undercard. He did amazing. He TKO'd his opponent, but still, or actually no, I don't think he TKO'd his opponent. I think it went to a unanimous decision, if I'm not mistaken. But no, he did what he had to do. He won the fight, regardless. But, yeah, I think Danny Garcia, he needs to definitely switch trainers. That'll help his career grow. I personally believe a guy like Ronnie Shields or, any of the big trainers today that are in boxing will make him into such a very good and much more versatile athlete, like he should. Because it just doesn't make sense how Danny Garcia doesn't make these adjustments and puts it into fruition. Because in this training camp that he said that he worked very hard in, him and his father, Angel Garcia, They were working on foot movement, defense. You know, they were working on all the things that Errol Spence was doing doing to Danny Garcia. So, I just think Danny Garcia, you know, if he works on those tweaks, he can easily win his fight or his bigger fights. You know, people try to say he's now 0-3 in big fights. Well, you know, that's not true. He, like, for the welterweight division, he's 1-3. He beat Robert Guerrero, which, you know, I know he's not, you know, like, he's not the biggest name, you know, at 147, but still, it's just that, you know, Robert Guerrero was like the first person he beat for his, you know, welterweight title. So, yeah, he is 1-3 in world title fights at 147. So, either way, Danny Garcia, he's a very good opponent. Errol Spence agreed, or he gave credit to Danny Garcia. So, I think if Danny Garcia, if he could switch trainers and fix up on his mistakes, then, you know, Danny Garcia, he's going to be such a bigger threat to all the up-and-coming welterweights and to other welterweights that may want to, you know, fight him in the future. Where Danny Garcia goes after this, I don't know. I'd probably say he should probably fight Sean Porter or Keith Thurman again, probably to, you know, prove a point and to, you know, regain his vengeance, or, you know, regain his confidence by getting his revenge over, you know, either of those two guys. But I think either way, Danny Garcia, he still has a very good future, and there's really nothing that I can hate him for. He's doing everything right, and you know, he's a very good fighter, man. For any of you guys that were trying to hate on, you know, Danny Garcia for him not giving it his all and try to say that he's a bum, he's not a bum when he had the courage and he gave it his all against Errol Spence. Errol Spence had a tough fight with Danny Garcia, and it was not easy for Errol Spence to, you know, get this win off of Danny Garcia. He got tired in the I think 10th or 11th round, but either or, Danny Garcia gave Errol a fight. If Danny had been more aggressive compared to what he did, like what he did to Errol last night, it would have been a very, very tough fight for Errol. And I think if Danny does that more, he's going to be a very huge threat for the welterweight division. And it's not like he's not a top welterweight. He's been inside the ring with top welterweights, so he is in that upper echelon of tougher competition. But just don't get it twisted when Danny Garcia is, like, basically making these mistakes simply because he needs to work on his style, and he needs to work on being more busier with his punches. But either or, Danny Garcia is a top level fighter, and I think he will be on his way for way more for bigger opportunities in the future. And you know, there's like no doubt about it. He proved it with Errol Spence, and I'm pretty sure he will prove it with other champions down the road. Because Errol Spence, he's not going to stay at 147 any longer. He's going to move up in weight, and I think once that's said and done, Danny Garcia, he could stay at 147, or he can move up to 154. But I think 147 is where it's at for Danny, and that will be his last, you know, pit stop of trying to campaign for world titles and try to be the best at what he does, or at what he does. He has a great, you know, career. He has a great legacy. Both fighters do. I think Danny and Errol will still go down as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters. Obviously, Errol is number one. I would give Danny maybe top 25, or like definitely in the top 10. But I don't know. I think either way, they're both Hall of Famers. There's really nothing to be hating on them, and there's more to come with both of these great fighters. They put on a show, and they did what they had to do. But I think if either fighter wants to improve their legacy, definitely work on the adjustments. Obviously, Errol Spence is very good, so you know he just needs to work on his ring rust after being out for so long. But Danny Garcia, definitely switch up his trainers and he'll be good. So yeah, that's pretty much my post fight review. This was a very interesting fight, and more fights to come. I'm gonna probably be talking about Anthony Yard versus Arthur Linden, or Linden Arthur. But either or, I'm going to hop off. I appreciate everything of what you guys have done, and more videos coming soon for the future. Thank you very much, and see you later. Bye.